Series 3. So we're going to start off today with a little review of what we discussed like 2 weeks ago. So in Colossians 1 through 4, we focused on the eternal and not the temporal. We needed to constantly set our sights on what's eternal, and obviously that is Christ. And there's a big difference, somebody pointed out, between the earth and eternity. And while we're down here on earth, we need to start to conform ourselves with what the Spirit leads us to. And it was also pointed out that the world sees Christ in us. And in Scripture there, one of the verses was, thankfully, our unrighteousness is hidden behind him. And we project, or we're supposed to project, and hopefully we project the outward appearance of Christ and through the Spirit's help. We're always supposed to seek spiritual and heavenly things. And this is a concept of the new man. A lot of sermons you'll hear, and a lot of commentators will talk about these verses in Colossians as putting on the new man and putting off the old man. And John got to talk about 2 weeks ago about the new man, which is kind of the happy thing. And now I get to talk about putting off the old man, which is we get to look at the ugly side of ourselves. And I can say, reading these and studying these verses over the last couple of weeks has reminded me of what my life used to be like and how sometimes it creeps back in, unfortunately. And I have to, lean back on the Spirit to take care of that. So when we get into verse 5 here, this is an example of killing that old self and killing that old man. And we're constantly reminded that now our bodies are tabernacles of the Holy Spirit, and they should be treating accordingly. And we should stop doing what we've been doing and take up the mantle of spirituality. And I find this interesting because if Paul is talking about this in the letter to Colossae, obviously the Colossians themselves were probably hip deep in these types of behavior, and it's kind of distressing that this church and obviously society around them was probably doing the same thing, but this church was actually engaging in this type of behavior. So let me see if I can get my slide up here. So would somebody like to read verse 5?
I'll do it.
Go ahead.
Therefore, put to death your members which are on the earth: fornication, uncleanliness, passion, evil desires, and covetousness, which is idolatry.
Okay. Did I share my? No, there we go. Okay, share.
There we go. Perfect.
Let me get the size here. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Yes.
Got it.
Is it?
Yes. we can.
Okay, so I'm going to be working exclusively in King James today, and I just find some of the words in King James interesting and more descriptive of what we're looking at. I'll be tearing it apart primarily with a lot of Greek. I won't be getting into Greek words too much, but mostly all the definitions are Greek. So John had read in his version, it says to kill or put to death. King James uses the word mortify. I find that mortify, I never assumed that mortify would be connected with death, but when you look at the Greek and tear apart the word mortify and death, it builds upon it. It means to subdue, make impotent, deprive of power. It actually in the Greek gets into abstinence of spirituality. So somebody has the absence of what they should have. Therefore, your members. Anybody have any thoughts on what members might be?
Hopefully not people that go to your church.
Maybe
So
some of the
yeah,
people that I work with, but
that's
yeah.
true. Yes. Now we're kind of delving into some of the following verses when we talk about some things that should be coming out of our mouth. That's another subject. So members, it's basically our body, but Paul is really tying in the aspect of and you'll see in this list here, he's focusing on certain members of the body, but it is the entire body. And then we're going to get down in verse 8, I think it is, the tongue, which is obviously a member, but people today probably don't think of the tongue as being a member. So the first one right off the bat is a big one. So it's the word fornication or sexual immorality in some translations. And that is the Greek word porneia, which we get our word pornography from, which we're all too familiar with, unfortunately. So the Greek word porneia is a much broader word, and it encompasses so much more than what we think of it as. When I see the word fornication, I've always been taught that that was sexual relations outside of marriage, and it is. But the Greek word porneia encompasses so much more. It's several different levels of illicit sexuality that a person could engage in. Was there a question? The Colossians would have recognized this word as being so in depth, so breadth and scope of the sexual immorality that they would have known what Paul was talking about. This was quite prevalent in the Greek and Roman society. And as we can see here, obviously, and then once again, unfortunately, it was prevalent in the Colossian community. So impurity, uncleanness. Anybody have any thoughts on what Paul is talking about here? Anybody want to go ahead?
Well, this whole verse here, it's kind of making me wonder exactly what he's talking about when he talks about members. I think it's not like people, but I think it's more like thoughts. It's your thoughts, your battles that go on in your mind every day when you choose to do right or choose to do wrong.
Mhm.
It's these choices you make, I guess, would be, if we're put to death, your choices on earth which lead to these things.
Right. That's exactly right. And these sins that Paul is talking about here obviously are physical and sexual in nature. When we get down into the next list that I'm hoping to reach, you're going to see they're more social sins, and they're talking about more of what you're talking about, Mr. Simpson. When I read this list, I see a lot of similarity in all of these adjectives, and that's why I tried to get into the Greek to see if I could see differences. And there's subtle differences here, but you'll see in the definitions here what the Colossians were actually doing. So impurity or uncleanness, the Greek definition that is lustful, luxurious, profligate, which means reckless or wasteful living. So we've gone from the fornication, which encompasses all types of different sexual deviations. Now we're into what some of the daily living might be of the Colossians, and how these people might be living. So we look at lust can encompass all sorts of definitions, and we're going to see that in the next definition, and actually the next definition of the two the adjectives in the list there. But now we're looking at I don't know what I don't know the history behind the Colossians too much, but obviously they were very wasteful, and they were living very luxuriously, and it was I guess embarrassing to the church how some of their people or members, it could be construed as members, people, or themselves were living. So the next on the list is inordinate affection or lust. So once again, that lust is getting in there, and I don't know what inordinate affection is. It's a interesting term. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on this. What this might be.
In New King James, it says it's passion, which is your desire. It goes into the next part, which is your desires, but just how you are living is a part of your life. In other words, if you took it away, that passion would be gone. So
Right.
it would be,
Yeah, and so in the Greek, I found this interesting. It was called a depraved or vile passions. And I'm not sure. So if you're not a Christian, inordinate affection probably wouldn't bother you so much, and you wouldn't recognize what those vile passions might be without the leading of the Holy Spirit. I can look back and sometimes in my life, when I was living in the flesh, I probably didn't consider some of my thoughts or actions to be depraved or vile passions, because a lot of the people around me were doing the same thing. So it was just normal to what Mr. Simpson mentioned, the members that were around me. And so I took that as being okay with my members, which is my personal being. So the next one, and go ahead.
Can I point something out here too? I
Sure.
think if we look at that last part of the phrase of the sentence, which is idolatry, and we put all of these, and maybe I'm jumping ahead, Tim, but but if we look at how these fit into idolatry, passion is interesting, because I think that means it's things that are passionate about this earth that really, what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that there are people like who are passionate about video games, right? And that doesn't seem like it's necessarily so bad, but their whole life is either a game or playing or things like that. And it's idolatry, even though they may not recognize it, but that's their passion. That's their life. That's what motivates them and drives them, is this passion, but it's a passion for what? I don't know.
Inordinate means unusually excessive or large, right? So,
Right.
So it's like affection that's blown up out of proportion, that is out of control. So, interesting.
And that's exactly what thank you, March. That's exactly what I'm trying to say, right? It's that people who are passionate about video games in this particular manner, where it's overblown. It's, not that video games are bad, but it's too consuming. And I'm just using that as an example, but there's tons of other things that people are way too consumed with as well.
No, that's a good discussion. And when we get to idolatry, that's one of the questions that I wanted to ask the group. But this depraved and vile passions, it really got me thinking that, like I said, when I was living in the flesh, I probably didn't consider what I was doing to be depraved or a vile passion. And it's complete. I was completely wrong, but and I unfortunately, I'm not even going to say I was unaware that it was wrong, because I self-medicated that right out of my system, so I didn't have to look myself in the mirror.
Well, we're all passionate about something. And,
Exactly.
Whether it's eating breakfast or driving our car or like you say, playing video games, we all have a passion for something. And I think that's, and there's one there that just drives us, whatever we do,
Right.
I think that's.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, sorry about that, Charlie. I think,
No.
Tim, when you're talking about when you're living differently and you don't realize what you're doing, you're kind of blind to it. But then when you change, you become a Christian and you realize that it's something that you don't want to be a part of. And I'm not sure if you guys do this, but every once in a while, you'll start thinking about those times when you were living in the flesh and just let out an audible just groan because you're so disgusted with yourself and what you used to do. But some of the things I used to do, I just look back like, how could you even do that? How was that even an option? But I didn't see anything wrong with it at the time, or I was self-medicating to where I made it not a problem.
Exactly. So the next word, I just love this word, evil concupiscence. I hope I said that right. And it also means, there's some translations, desire. So when you look at this, we're number 2, 3, and 4, they're so connected and interrelated, but there's subtle differences. So the dictionary describes this word as strong sexual desire what is forbidden. And once again, living in the flesh, you don't consider your strong sexual desire to be a problem. In fact, in my younger days, that was quite, that was something to be proud of, and you kind of wore it on your sleeve as a badge. And I'm going to leave it at that. So any comments, anybody see any differences or different or more subtle variations in these three words here?
Well, I mean, it says what's forbidden, right? So I'm thinking, we're seeing it in our culture today, the level and the intensity goes up. I know, reading about people that, going back to pornea, it's kind of, because it is like a drug, most of these probably can be blown out of proportion, obviously, from the descriptions, especially with the Greek, which I appreciate you pulling that out. But, seeing that's just, I see that going to another level where it's like dangerous to either yourself or to others. So it's beyond just kind of, it's almost taboo. It's getting into like the demonic realm. So without, I want to keep it light too, obviously, as I know you do too, but that's kind of what has stuck out to me when I just see desire for what is forbidden.
No, and you're exactly right. And that didn't dawn on me. And I'm glad you pointed it out, the demonic realm, because we're going into, I guess, degrees of subtleness that are prompted by the demonic. And that's a really good catch, because I think we're sinking deeper as we go, and we're not aware of that, and our judgment is obviously clouded by what's earthly and fleshly, and it's very condemning.
I think as you look at this, oh, go ahead, John.
I can wait. You first.
Well, I was going to say, as you look at the list, the person is getting closer and closer to the edge of actually committing the act or actually doing it. And with the strong sexual desire and the desire for which is forbidden, it's like what you attain something and then you want something more, something worse, or something that you can't have, and you're just getting closer to that edge. Sorry, John, I got a little confused. Oh, you know what it was last night they had this, I was watching the news and this commercial popped up with this new anti-contraception pill that's called Julie. And the commercial for it looked like it was the most fun thing in the entire world. And it was going out to the kids, and it's just, I don't know, it's just where this world is going deeper and deeper, and I don't like it. Sorry, John.
No, I was going to say something similar, except that if you're in this state, you don't really realize how far you are. I remember having a conversation with a coworker a long time ago, and he had just moved to San Francisco, and he went to one of their parades, and he was so excited about it the first day, and then the next day he was like it was okay, and I was like, oh really? You were so excited? And he's like, yeah, but I thought it was going to be a lot more depraved than it was. It was just so. And I was like, what? I never expected hearing something like that before. But he was like, no, I wanted it to be much worse than it really was. I was like, oh, wow. Okay. And that's the state you end up in when not only are you feeding the flesh, but it's idolatry, right? When you're worshiping yourself or worshiping these types of things.
And I think we're all aware, we're talking about what took place in Colossae with the Colossians, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, but nothing appears to have changed in our society. We are going down. We're not going down. We're on the road. We're traveling at 100 miles an hour down this road in society, and this is, what John mentioned, every day when I watch TV, I see a new level of depravity, not only in the programming, but on the commercials. And the commercials appear to have no boundaries anymore. I mean, they're talking about every sexual desire and lust and forbidden desires, and they're right there on TV. I mean, I grew up with Ricky and Lucy in 2 different beds, and before that, one partner had to have a leg on the floor because the TV standards said that if they were in bed, somebody had to have their leg on the floor. So it's here. I mean, we're there.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Jason.
I-
If I
you
don't
asked-
see anybody, please just speak, because I don't have everybody's up on my monitor here. So go ahead.
All right. So on the first 4, you asked about subtleties. The first 2 I see as absolute evils, meaning all the time. There's no question about it, right? The sexual immorality, anything outside of a man and a woman in marriage is impure, is forbidden. Same thing with the impurity and uncleanness. But the next 2, 3 and 4, I see as neutral. Right? To have a passion is neutral, but what is the object of that passion, or what is that passion taking me to do? Same thing with strong sexual desire. I think we'd all be in agreement, if there was not a strong sexual desire, we wouldn't go forth and multiply. But what is the object of that strong sexual desire? What is it bringing me to do? So the next 2 I see as something that can almost be seen as a neutral. Am I utilizing it for good according to what God's standards are, or am I turning it into something that is evil and away from God's standards? Whereas the first 2 I see is just always wrong. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, there are levels of degrees here. So the next one, greed, covetousness. And so this is interesting. So when I see greed in some translations, I kind of stop and I'm just like, okay, we're in sexual issues here and the flesh, and all of a sudden greed is put in there. But you know, greed can not only apply to the material, but it can apply to the sexual, and that means using a person for sex. And once again, when I went through this list and really tore it apart over the last couple of weeks, it was difficult for me, because I was firmly planted in all 5 of these things, or 6 of these things, many times in my life. And so, you know, using a person for sex was unfortunately part of my life. And, you know, I really had to stare hard at myself many times. And so I put this question: how much do we need? Christ should be enough. But we can covet, and next we're getting into idolatry. And I wanted to really open up idolatry. And we've been talking about this, but idolatry is pure and simple, putting something in the place of God. And I don't know if anybody has any other definitions. That's a very basic definition, but I wanted to open up, you know, what are some examples of biblical idolatry, and then also examples of our idols. We've already been talking about some, and John brought up one that's interesting: video gaming. So yes, video gaming can be an idol. You know, other idols that we may have out there we may not think as idols, but what are some examples of biblical idolatry? I'll start off with one, and it's the people, the Israelites. You know, when Moses left them for a short period of time, they slipped right back into their old ways, you know, melted down all their gold and made a calf and started dancing around it and doing some of the things that we just detailed in this list.
Yeah.
Another one was the division of the nation of Israel and the northern kingdom. They didn't want his people, the king didn't want their people to go to Jerusalem, because they may be persuaded to join Judah and Benjamin again. So he set up his own temple and his own rituals and his own things where you can come and worship, quote unquote, God in his area. And that became an area of idolatry for the Israelites.
Right. How'd that work out for them?
Well, they went into captivity and they've never found him again.
There you go.
So are we saying that? Are you saying politics can be idolatry?
Ooh,
Sean?
easy there.
Yep.
Because that
Not
was a whole
politics.
political thing that he did, right?
Right.
He replaced God because of the politics, because he wanted to stay, the northern tribe wanted to stay in control.
Well, and also, if you look at King Rehoboam, when Solomon died, he asked, they said, we'll honor you, but we need you to reduce the taxes. And he said, well, I'm going to be worse than my father, and you're going to be, and that's why they divided the kingdom in itself, because he and his friends were more interested in themselves than they were in the kingdom and the people.
Which goes back to point 5, right? Greed and covetousness, right? They want to,
Exactly.
so they're more the old WIFM, in marketing they talk about, and that's what's in it for me, and I think that's that's interesting.
And then we can go to the New Testament and we can just look at Judas.
Oh, that's a good
He
one.
was-
Exactly.
He was, it was all about the money, and he didn't understand why they wasted all that money of the oil on Jesus' head or feet.
Right.
I'll also bring up one which is in the New Testament and in the Old Testament, which one of those things that I find really interesting is that they used sex as a form of worship to these gods. So it was literally idolatry. So they would go to the temple of one of these false gods and engage with a prostitute. And so it was fun and enjoying, but also it was a form of worship to these false gods. And so that aspect of it is kind of hidden nowadays. We don't really recognize that, but I think it's still what Paul's saying here is that's still worship to these false gods. And maybe you yourself consider yourself to be that God, but it's still a worship. It's still idolatry.
Yeah. Well, was it Molech in the Old Testament? They put their babies in there and it'd lower its arms and burn them up in the fire.
Yeah, that's just awful. And we have a similar action that is acceptable in our society today with our unborn children and our born children. We're getting to that point, which is just, it's horrifying. It's absolutely horrifying. So Sean mentioned something about the money, and I'm show me the money. And I'm going to ask the question, what are examples of some of our idols today? And John mentioned video games, Sean, obviously money. So, we may not see our jobs as an idol, but our jobs can become an idol. We may not see some of our behaviors that may be our idols. And I'm going to point to one, and I don't want to throw stones at anybody, but there's certain beverages that everybody has to have every day, many times a day, that can be considered an idol. I'm going to point to myself and throw stones at myself. I've been addicted to working out my entire life. I've destroyed some parts of my body because of it. And it's been a difficult thing, but you never would think being healthy and being in the gym or being active as being an idol. But I can tell you that it is, and it remains close to my heart, unfortunately, and I still struggle with that. But that can be an idol. So there are all sorts of subtle idols in the world that we may have passions for, and a desire to do these that could be idols. So I bared my soul there. Is anybody open to bare their soul?
I would bring up
go ahead, John.
All right, I'm going to beat you to it, Sean, because I'm going to say what you were going to say.
What?
No, I don't know what Sean was going to say. I was just going to mention for Christians, another one can be that fits in this list of overpassionate is politics. We can get too passionate about politics to the extent where we're more passionate about politics than we are about Jesus.
Yes.
And that's another one of those things that can be a form of idolatry. And I'm done, Sean. You go.
You were close. I was going to say ministry.
Okay.
Your ministry could be an idol, and you'll talk to some pastors, the first thing they ask is, so how many are in your church, or
Yes.
how many people go to your school, or any of those things? That can be a passion that you're working more for the success or how well you look to other people. And I think that's for everybody, not just ministry, but everybody wants to look good whenever they meet somebody. Because usually what's the first question people ask you? What do you do?
Mhm. Yeah.
I got another one. So we're talking, Tim's saying, I'm not going to throw stones at y'all, but for this one, you guys can't throw stones at me. I will say sports. I know this isn't popular at a men's group, but that it's more that I think of the over passionate, inordinate, affection, to where you're maybe not willing to go to blows, but you're definitely screaming enough in your house that your wife has an issue with it. I was there. My brother was there. My dad was there. A lot of people in my life, and so I'll offer that one.
What do you mean?
Well, I guess you gotta look at how many broken TVs in your house, right? There you go.
There you go. Yeah.
I mean, as long as you're not a Dodgers fan, I think it's okay.
Yeah, there you go. I agree with that. I agree.
How many of you have a flag that you throw at the TV every time there's?
So we're talking about all these, and I unfortunately fall right into all of those, most of those, and I have tried over the last several years to change that, and it's been a difficult journey, but the Spirit has been leading me towards a better way of thinking. So, and I know, we talk about our jobs. Our jobs can be our idols too, because they supply us with money, and money kind of becomes a substitute for our God, and that is a very that's a very dangerous lover of money. And we all know the passages in the Bible that talk about money and manna and who we serve. So just kind of throw this question in: how do we know when something is an idol or becoming an idol?
How do we know?
When you think about it more than you do God, when it's more important to you than, I don't know. I was thinking, your church family could be an idol if you put it in the wrong perspective. I mean, shoot, idols, there's no corner on that market. Anything could turn into an idol, but when it starts replacing your first thought in the morning, when you first get up, I mean, my first thought in the morning when I first get up is, I want to spend time with God. I want to spend time with the Lord. I mean, if it's my first thought in the morning when I first get up is I want to go to work, well, there's something wrong there.
I'd say when it becomes a priority, like Mr. Simpson just said, when it becomes a priority or becomes unbalancing to where it overwhelms your normal daily activities, whether it's I know with the OCD, there's only so many times you could flick a light switch before it becomes a problem, right? And so that's when I had to say, okay, maybe there's something going on, John. With the pornography thing too, I know with myself, I have a huge, I've been definitely working on it, but with the pornography thing, used to have a huge issue with that, to where I'd be, oh shoot, I got to hustle out to work, and next thing you know, I'm speeding to work because I couldn't leave the house. You know what I mean? So things like that, when it starts overtaking your life, when it becomes priorities, is when it starts to become an idol.
And this is all great stuff. And one thing that I used to do, and I probably subconsciously still do it, is I would put percentages. It's like, okay, I'm devoting 25% of this, and I'm devoting 50% of that. So, and then I start to rationalize and say, well, no, I'm not devoting. And so it becomes kind of a game. And that's what John just mentioned, OCD. I'm guilty of the same thing. And so I start just overanalyzing a lot of these idols and potential idols.
I think it's also that it's a distraction. Is when you are spending time with the Lord and all of a sudden your phone bings and you stop praying or you stop being with the Lord and you go to your phone to see what's going on or whatever.
Right.
And I think it's a distraction. I think our biggest idol that we have today is our phones. Because
Well,
it
that's
is
a big
so,
one right there. And you just
so
nailed it.
prevalent.
So I was tiptoeing around that. I was tiptoeing around the beverage thing, but the phone I didn't want to touch, but I'm glad you brought that up because, you know, you always see people talking about, I go to a restaurant and I see people sitting at a table and they're all looking at their phones. And, you know, people are sitting down for family dinner and people have their phones. And it's like, man, if I had a personal phone when I was a kid, if I brought it to the table, I would have got my head smacked and the phone taken away for probably ever. And that was not even a consideration. When we sat down to dinner, the phone was taken off the hook and that was family time. And it usually lasted a couple hours through dessert. And, but you're exactly right. That phone, with all of its benefits, is probably the biggest idol we have now in society.
Yeah.
So I wanted to point, before we leave this list here, I wanted to point out that this list starts with actions and then traces back to feelings or thoughts. So the first one is action, but then it drops all the way down to the feeling or thoughts. And if we get to the next list, it's completely the opposite. And it's something to think about. Let's see, where's my next one here? So to close up this list here, I wanted to read Romans 8:5. I'm gonna have to read off my paper because my other computer crashed. So Romans 5:8. Those who live according to the flesh have their mind set on what the flesh desires. But those who live in accordance with the Spirit have their mind set on what the Spirit desires. The mind governed by the flesh is death. So that's what we heard in the very first word of verse 5, death, mortify, get rid of, kill. Put the mind governed by the Spirit, but the mind governed by the Spirit is life and peace. The mind governed by flesh is hostile to God. It does not submit to God's law, nor can it do so. Those who are in the realm of the flesh cannot please God. So that pretty much sums it up. You know, this is all flesh. This is, you know, sexual in nature. So we can't be the new man if we still have the old man on.
Hey Tim, what was the Roman verse again?
Romans 8:5-8. So that, if the whole paragraph there, 1-8, is about it, but I just kind of picked out that.
Thank you.
So now if I can get my computer to work again, I'll move on to the next slide, but she is not. There it is. Okay.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, so verses 6. Somebody want to read verse 6?
I will.
Go ahead.
Because of these things, the wrath of God is coming upon the sons of disobedience.
Okay, so anybody have any thoughts on what these things might be?
Well, I think it's just the list above that we just worked our way through. I think that's kind of what he's alluding to.
There you go. And you can break it down into sins,
Yeah.
but it would make more sense, like Charlie said. We're talking about it's all interconnected. These verses are all interconnected, and obviously we're looking back at these sexual types of things. So it's just, for which these things. So I'm in the King James version. For which things sake the wrath. So I want to look at that word wrath for a second. And this is the wrath of God, which is the next two words. So this word wrath in Greek is called orge, and it has a very interesting meaning. And the reason why I'm talking about this particular word here is because in the next two verses, the next following two verses, the word wrath comes up again, but it means something different. So in Greek, the word wrath, orge, is vengeance, anger, exhibited in punishment. and then comma, punishments inflicted by kings. So this sentence is, you know, we read it in English and it just is the wrath of God. All right, we get that. But this wrath is actually the punishment of the eternal. And the word God there is theos, and that can be described as the Godhead, the triune Godhead. So it's not just the punishment of God, but it's punishment of of the triune God for the children, us, the Colossians here, of disobedience. So they've disobeyed by living in the flesh. So does anybody have any examples of God's wrath in the Bible? I mean, it's full of it, but any come to mind?
Sodom and Gomorrah.
Very good, and that dovetails exactly what we're talking about here.
Well, when Caesar, when the people were calling Caesar a god, the outcome wasn't too good for him.
Exactly. Yeah.
Plagues,
What was that?
the plagues and the
Oh, the
locusts
plagues.
and all those.
Good. Yeah, I mean, we can point to many different wrath type events that were exhibited by God. And it's, you know, I look back to the Old Testament. You follow me, you have blessings. You don't follow me, you have curses. So and those are his wrath. And in the Old Testament, there's a lot of times, many times, too many times when the children of Israel did not follow God and they felt his wrath. Sometimes were plagues, immediate plagues. Sometimes were snakes, venomous snakes biting thousands, tens of thousands of people. Sometimes the earth actually opened up and swallowed full clans and peoples and tribes because they disobeyed God. So verse 7.
I
Go
think
ahead.
a lot of that. I think a lot of this comes back to idolatry in verse
Yes.
5, where it says, "Which is idolatry," and that's the main. You know, when we look at the wrath of God, it's because of sin. It's because we've rebelled against God, and what we've done is we've replaced him with a different God.
Right.
And so all of these cases, there's a lot of different cases of wrath of God, and the ones that we see in the book of Revelation, right, where he's coming back to earth and man makes war with him. A lot of these things will happen in that time as well. But it's primarily the fact that man rejects God as the authority and has replaced it with something else.
Right.
I look at it along the same lines. At least it might be a translation thing, but mine says coming upon the disobedient and not coming upon disobedience, because I think all of us would agree and admit that we have not been perfectly obedient even after coming to Christ. So I see it as a distinction between the saved and the unsaved. Jesus was obedient upon death. Once we are in Christ, we are become the obedient because it's his obedience that comes upon us versus the disobedient, those that have rebelled. We've all rebelled against God. But then there's the two separate people. And we are found in the obedience of Christ versus without Christ being the disobedient, the unsaved. That's how I see that one.
No, that's a good point. I like that.
The
My
ultimate
Bible
example
says,
of the wrath of God, I think, would be Noah's flood.
Oh, yes.
That just does it all.
Pretty much.
yeah. I was going to mention that my Bible, Jason, says sons of disobedience, which I also find very interesting, right? Are you a son of God, or are you a son of disobedience?
Right.
Yeah.
And you could take that to the next logical step. Are you a son of God or son of the devil? And so if you're disobedient, you're the son of the devil. Yeah, exactly. So verse 7, in which ye also walked sometime when ye lived in them. So obviously this Paul is really, you know, driving home the nail here, that the Colossians have been walking in disobedience and living in disobedience.
I like the emphasis that Jason put in being followers of Christ, because we can kind of look at lists like this and our natural reactions can be like, let's check these lists off and then feel like we're okay, right? Like the idea is that, you know, oh, once I stop doing these things, I'm okay. where the reality is it's not, right? This is part of our sanctification, but it isn't a list to be saved in a sense, right? So we could almost look at it without the context of knowing Christ and be like, all right, well, I don't do those things, and I've been working on it, so I don't do these things, and so I'm good. And the concept is, no, it's not that at all, right? So I like that.
Can I say something too? Because I love what you just said, March, and I like it where in the verse 7 it says, "When you lived in them," and that's that idea you lived in this thing, but now, right? We're supposed to be abiding with Christ. We live in Him, and so that's the difference. It's not. It's not like you said. It's not a list that you check off and you're like, oh, I'm good and I'm holy. It's where are you living? Where's your address?
Right, and we're very list oriented people. I mean, if you look on the internet, you'll find lists for everything. The rich man who approached Christ and said, "What do I need to do?" And I did this, I did that, I did that, I did that. And Christ's like, "Okay, here's one last thing. Will you do this and follow me?" And he's like, I can't give up my money, my idol. Okay, that's not possible. And so I always think about that young man when he walked away, what he was giving up. But then I asked myself, what could I do that? Would I do that? I don't. Hopefully, I would make the right decision, at that time. So there's a bunch of things in the chat here I didn't even notice. Okay, we got all those. Yes. So we have
nothing important, Tim.
No, that's all right. I get so caught up. I don't see the things going on around me. I got 2 computers and notes all over the place. So we only have 7 more minutes, and I've got like 10 more slides. No, I only have 1 more slide. I don't think we're going to get through that because it's another list, and I was hoping to get to that. But I think we're going to have to hold that for next time, and we'll just kind of wrap this up. Anybody have any concluding remarks regarding our desire to do depraved, awful, idolistic things?
I got something. I never want to condone sin, but I also don't want the sin to be condemning. And I look at the difference in the language here of walking and living, and recognize the fact that not only can we become people who check lists, but we can also have those lists be a weight on our shoulders and be something that we self-condemn ourselves for making these mistakes. And I see the language in that, as well as in Galatians, when it talks about making it a practice versus I messed up, right? I've been walking for 40 some years. I still stub my toe, right? It's something that I need to deal with and work out of my life, but I can't let it hang over my head, be a weight on my shoulders. I think the difference is I forgot who was earlier talking about whether or not it pierces the conscience or not, tells us whether or not we're sons of God or sons of disobedience, right? We walked in these things, it was no big issue, right? But the moment we become in Christ, we no longer walk in them. We may still, from time to time, stumble in them, but it'll be piercing. I think Spurgeon said it, whereas, as you become a Christian, a moment from Christ, and then as you mature, it's like you sin more often and it feels less, versus a mature Christian, you sin less often, but it feels greater. And so for me, it's kind of, especially with young boys, I try and let them know the difference between what it means to walk or make a practice of a sin versus the fact that we're still going to sin in Christ, but how is it that we should deal with it? Because I don't want it to condone it. I also don't want it to be condemning upon me. So.
Yeah, those are great points. Well, this is an interesting topic. It's like I said, it hit a really close to home for me. Some of the stuff was difficult to talk about. And I can tell you that I didn't open the full book of Tim to everybody here, but it's some of these things were made me think back on my past actions and lives. And it's unfortunate that I walked down those paths and treated some of the people the way I did back then.
We appreciate your honesty, Tim. We've all been there, brother.
Yeah. So I guess we'll close in prayer. Would anybody like to close in prayer?
I'll do it.
Okay.